Without meditation, mind hither with a wondrous thou. Without meditation, mind hither with a wondrous thou. Adorable him, adorable him. Search him out in secret now, search him out in secret now. Without meditation, mind hither with a wondrous thou. Without meditation, mind hither with a wondrous thou.
Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
And with that emphatic reintroduction to Lux's beautiful voice, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with these divine friends of mine.
Lux was just with us a few weeks ago in London, and a few weeks before that, Niriksha flew into London and at midnight and expected me to come and meet her at midnight. Didn't you, Nick?
That sounds funny. It's like we're going to some Sherlock Holmes stuff.
And then you had a flight at like in 2 more hours or something. And yeah. So,
but I hope you liked your present.
Oh, it was amazing. So it's next to my desk. Meditating duck. That's what she had got me on my desk. Next to the image of Kailash, which I have. And we have Chris with us. Hi, Chris.
Hello, guys.
We don't. Oh, and Bhaduri, of course.
Oh, thank you.
We don't have Mike and Lauren. They're busy doing various things. So we're on chapter 7 of the Autobiography of a Yogi podcast, where we're going through the book line by line. And chapter 7 is entitled The Levitating Saint. And we'll start with our expectations from the chapter. And the Levitating Saint is next in the line of magical titles in this book, but it's kind of a hat trick of titles where we're talking about specific saints. So before we had a saint with 2 bodies, then we had the perfume saint, then we had the tiger swami, and now we're talking about the Levitating Saint, Nagendranath Bhaduri. And the Levitating Saint, let's talk about the chapter first of all, the title. So it's quite a title. And in preparation for this, the word levitating must have really entered some marrow of my psyche, because I had a dream about levitation. So I was just having a normal dream, and in that dream I was meditating. And it was such a real dream. I thought I was actually meditating because everything was as it was in my room. Chris, as you've seen, in my meditation room, and I was going deep in meditation, and after half an hour my whole body left the meditation seat, and I was 2 or 3 feet above the seat, and I was like, oh wow, this is pretty special. And it was so real, and I thought, oh yes, finally I'm making some like physical, I can see a tangible thing, an improvement, an impact of my meditation. So, oh yes. And it's very different to like dreams when you fly, which is usually like quite action packed and stuff, and you're always doing things, but this one was quite cool. Chris?
Yeah, before I actually read it wasn't before, it was just after I started reading the Autobiography of a Yogi. An acquaintance or a friend of mine, he had actually told me that he levitated, for real, and completely sort of a byproduct, as similar to what you mentioned, to Priyank, where you're meditating and it just happens, as opposed to that's your intention and you're trying to make it happen. It just happened, and whenever I first read this, it was like a boyish excitement that came over me when I first read it, because how many times have you done things when you're a child, like pretend to sort of move things. We've watched Harry Potter, and we want to sort of have the imagination, at least, like we could actually move objects or do something like that. And so it sort of, there's something about it, like maybe intuitively, that we know we have this power within us, and it's quite an exciting thing to read naturally. But when I first read it, I thought, wow, okay, I'm going to learn something. This is something we can relate to and might reveal, what's behind the sort of beyond the veil. It's a reality. So yeah, really, really pumped to go through it line by line.
I was hoping you were, Chris, going to say this morning I meditated and I levitated for real.
I cannot confirm or deny.
Or deny. Well done. Very good. And then the second half of my dream was I went back down on my seat and then I went outside and then I started floating above the trees, which is pretty cool. And I came back down and then I realized, I must be dreaming. This is getting a bit insane. But going back to the book, so it's a fantastic title, and equally fantastic title is the picture of the Levitating Saint, or Nagendranath Bhaduri. And if you look at him, it's one of my favorite pictures because I love pictures of mystics, and this is quite a mystic of one of the highest orders, isn't it? Looking at his face and his eyes going straight up to the third eye and beyond, whatever is beyond. He seems like he's going beyond. And it also reminds me of the picture where Bhaduri Mahasaya is sitting like this, and his eyes are twinkling, and he's kind of looking beyond you, kind of beyond you as a physical manifestation, but straight into your spirit. And here he's kind of looking straight at the spirit, where as he sees it within himself. So it's a beautiful picture. And we also know later that Bhaduri Mahasaya also had an episode of levitation when he was having a discussion with his lovely wife, a confrontation, and that was a different purpose, but similar pictures, and levitation also binds them in some way, but obviously a different circumstance. So this is effectively a different flavor of saint. He's much more mysterious, isn't he? He's much more mystical and a bit more magic about him, even then compared to the saint with two bodies, I think, because because he doesn't really go into the scariness of the two bodies in that, but here. That's Swami Pranavananda. But here everyone's seeing the impact of it, so it's pretty scary as you go through the chapter. And then he has some very prophetic claims. Yep, Nick?
I was just going to say, with the levitating, he gives me like 2% Mataji vibes, because, like she levitates out from her cave, and I'm like, I wonder if there's a connection there.
Yes, Mataji as well. Mataji and Babaji above the water. And Bhaduri Mahasaya was there as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Then there's so the dialogue, there's a lot of dialogue in this chapter, quite profound dialogue, and some of it is quite prophetic, and some timeless philosophy elements to it, which is quite nice. And then we have some more mammoth footnotes. We have more of Emerson, we have Mirabai, we have St. Joseph, we have St. Teresa, and St. Francis as well, I think is not mentioned directly, but in other ways he's mentioned. And then we have this whole concept of defying gravity, which is going to be one of the key parts of the discussion. So let's talk about the inquisitiveness of young Mukunda and young, what's his friend's name? Upendra Mohan Chaudhry. So it's two friends talking, and not dissimilar to the four of us talking about saints that we may have met in the past. And they, Upendra says, I've found a saint that can effectively float. I saw him at yesterday's meeting. And Mukunda gives him a smile and says, maybe I can guess who you're talking about. Was it Bhaduri Mahasaya? And even gives the address, which is quite nice. And Upendra was a bit disappointed not to be the one to give him this rumor, be the first to tell him. And these rumors that keep on going around and finding their way to Mukunda's ears, I suppose these are probably the best type of rumors, aren't they? As opposed to the usual rumors that wander the halls in school. Halls such as relationships and arguments and, falling outs and all that kind of stuff that usually we're used to in schools. But here is a spiritual centric rumor about masters and things like that. So I think that's quite nice. And Mukunda confirms that that his inquisitiveness about saints was known essentially to all his friends and probably around the schools that he was in, and all the clubs that he'd established as a child, and libraries that he'd also established as a child, which you can read about in Mejda. So we don't know where this Upendra is, which of those avenues they met to discuss this, but it was one of them. And they all Mukunda says love giving him the route to another master for him to explore. And then he says that the great Yogi lives really close, so close to him that he visits him. Chris?
Yeah, I just thought, these are, if you transport yourself to that time, and India is blessed with many great saints and masters, how many people would take advantage of that? Kids talking amongst themselves, like, oh yeah, you saw that, well I saw this, they try to one up themselves. And Yogananda says they delighted in setting me on a fresh track. I wonder if that's a nod to this kind of, maybe the rumor mill, as you sort of alluded to there, Priyank, but it's actually related to like various saints that you might have seen, that you want to sort of boast about, that maybe you hadn't. There's plenty of people out there that would maybe delight in that. So I'm sure Yogananda probably had his practice at determining who was actually telling the truth and who wasn't, in those early years.
Yeah, he was probably more than capable, wasn't he? Sifting. Yeah. So then he says he lives very close to his house, and this then made Upendra very excited, and they further discussed after that. But I think the house that they're referring to at this stage is 4 Garpar Road. So I've been informed that this Levitating Saint's house you can still visit even to this day. Hope to go there later this year. So if you're in that area in Calcutta, then do take the opportunity. So then they discuss it, and Mukunda says he's seen him doing those remarkable feats, performing them, and he says he has expertly mastered the various pranayamas mentioned in the eightfold yoga path of Patanjali. Chris, what are the eightfold Patanjali sutras?
Sorry, just give me 2 seconds.
Niriksha, what are the eightfold paths?
I can do threefolds.
Okay, go on then. Do 1, 2, 3.
I think it was like yama, niyama, artha, dharma.
No. Yama, niyama, asana.
Asana.
Yes. Lux,
I think
next?
artha was somewhere.
I've suddenly got the answers. If
Go on, Lux. What's next?
Lux, give us any more.
Yam, niyam, asana.
Dhyana?
That's a bit later on. So yam, niyam, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyana,
Yamas.
dharana. And then the last is not least, Chris, what is it?
The yamas.
The last but not least is samadhi.
Oh, did you? Oh, that's,
Yeah. That's the goal. And we're going to come to that goal of superconscious states in a bit.
Okay, can I just read out the English of that, just in case anyone's not,
yes, please do.
Not read into. The yamas is abstinences. Niyama is observances. Asana is posture. Pranayama, breathing. Pratyahara, withdrawal. Dhyana, concentration. dhyana, is that one's right? Meditation and samadhi absorption.
Very
Must
good.
remember. If you ask me again, I think that's the second time you've asked me that, Craig.
Probably third.
Third, maybe.
So yes, then we have that the fact that he's mastered it, and then once apparently Bhaduri Mahasaya performed the Bhastrika pranayam with such force that it felt like there was a storm in the room. So the Bhastrika pranayama. Niriksha, do you want to read out what the Bhastrika pranayam is from Swami Shivananda's description of the process?
Yes, of course. So Swami Sivananda describes the process as inhale and exhale quickly 10 times, like the bellows of the blacksmith. Constantly dilate and contract. Wait, no, it's a quote. I'm not reading this properly. I'm going to do that again. So he describes inhale and exhale quickly 10 times, like the bellows of a blacksmith. Constantly dilate and contract. When you practice this pranayama, a hissing sound is produced. The practitioner should start with the rapid expulsions of breath following one another in rapid succession. When the required number of expulsions, say 10 for a round, is finished. Am I reading this right?
Yes,
I'm
it's
so
correct.
sorry.
That's correct.
Okay, it's finished. The final expulsion is followed by a deepest possible inhalation. The breath is suspended as long as it could be done with comfort. Then, deepest possible exhalation is done very slowly. The end of the deep exhalation completes around Vastrika.
Yes, so there's parts of this that are within our practice, but not this specifically. So for some context, so Bhaduri Mahasaya would have been performing this, and it sounds, as it said, like a hissing sound. So it sounds something like this. So your stomach does this. So it kind of makes that kind of noise. So he was doing that. You can probably, my sissy sounds were nothing compared to the sound that Bhaduri Mahasaya made, because when he did that simple exercise, his lungs were used with such force that it felt like a storm was in the room, which is quite magical. I don't know if anyone's been in the room when that kind of storm's taken place. Possibly not.
I did it. I did mention this before the podcast, but I did do something like this. I was asking if it was done differently. Is it still called Bhaskrita? But I did it with a group of maybe 10, 12 people, and that felt like a storm. That was really, at the time, quite powerful.
Was your hair flying around and your clothes barely struggling to stick?
Astrally, maybe, yeah. Because I was almost blown out of my body. Really, it was such a powerful practice that it almost took me a while to recover. I had to. After it, I was told to eat because I was really, really, gone with it, and such a moving experience. But probably should have done it with a bit more of a guiding hand. Thankfully, I've got Guruji now, but you need to be careful with these things.
Niriksha?
I was just going to add, I feel like almost all the breaths of yoga and pranayama, I just think it's the same thing, but when you study it like very closely, they're all very different. It's like this, it's kind of like we have wind, but there are different types of wind. The wind can be like a little breeze, or it could be a tornado, but it's still wind moving, right? So that's how I like to connect with pranayama, and how it's the same thing, but it expresses itself very subtly and differently. So I don't know, that usually helps me as a practitioner because I get mixed up too.
Lux?
Yeah, just to add to what Nick said, my parents follow like Babaji's Kriya Yoga, and the pranayama is like more nasal and it's like slightly nuanced. So it's interesting that we all follow like slightly different techniques to the same goal. I think.
Yeah, that's obviously a slightly different lineage that Lux is referring to. But this actual storm that had arisen in the room, this, no wonder later on he describes that, he doesn't usually have visitors and he's a bit of a recluse, but no wonder, eh? The seclusion. He later says, he later says the seclusion was more for their protection. And obviously if there's such storms flying around, then that would be a prudent thing. So then he would extinguish his breath, as Niriksha said. Then he would remain motionless. So there's a big storm. There's a lot of intense activity, and our practice is obviously a bit more subtle than this intensity that this yoga practice has. But I love that there's this calm after the storm as opposed to before the storm. The storm creates the calm in this instance, which is quite a good take on that. Lux, is your hand up, or have you got something? No. And then so there's the calm, and then that calmness leads to a state of super consciousness, and that super consciousness leads to an exceptionally long footnote. And the long footnote goes into some scientific research about pranayama. So firstly, I didn't read the previous footnote. Actually, it was describing the pranayams that he would conduct, which was to control the life force through regulation of the breath, as we said, and the Bhastrika bellows, he says, makes the mind steady, which is what's happened in his case, because he remained completely motionless after that into his superconscious state. And the superconsciousness. So he refers to 2 or 3 different people in this footnote. So the first person he refers to is Professor Jules Bois of Sorbonne, and this is in the 1920s. And then he also refers to Coism, who's another French psychologist, and also Emerson later on as well, and Freud as well is always mixed in there. So it's quite phenomenal how well read Guruji is. This is obviously would have been quite popular research, but he's not just in psychiatry that he's seems to have interest in and quote just so freely in his footnotes. Psychiatry, there's medicine he likes to quote, and also physics and science. So it's kind of like all around, isn't he? And not obviously we're not even mentioning all the other poets that he quotes, like Emerson and Arnold. So he's very, very, very well read, and he's through quoting all these people, he's forcing us to be well read, isn't he? In a sense, he's kind of emphasizing the importance of being well read and well rounded in your knowledge of other sciences and other paths, social sciences even. Niriksha, what do you think?
I wanted to add, I just really wanted to give a shout out to Ramanujan, who would quote Hindu scriptures as a mathematician. So there's also an opposite perspective on this, where you have your very worldly mathematicians quoting the Hindu philosophy and Hindu scriptures. So I feel like though there's no separation between science and spirituality, and I feel like there is proof, and this is what I feel like it's alluding to. I really want to just put that out there. I feel like the greats really know what's going on behind the scenes. I just had to share this.
Chris?
Yeah, and right now we have the whole battle between Barbie and Oppenheimer, just the movie, the movie release, and Oppenheimer is obviously famous for one being the father of the atomic bomb, but secondly quoting the Bhagavad Gita, right? So just to add to that.
Indeed. So Jules Bois. So he did some research into superconsciousness, and he was obviously a French psychologist, he says here, and he says it is the exact opposite of the subconscious mind conceived of by Sigmund Freud. So let's talk a little bit about Jules Bois first before we go about what he's talking about. So Jules Bois, apparently his travels took him to the Middle and Far East, as well as Greece, Turkey, etc., even Egypt. And he also encountered along the way, so this is a contemporary of Yogananda, slightly before that, actually. He was born 20 years before or so. So he encountered Swami Vivekananda and Rabindranath Tagore in his trip to India, which sparked some interest in Asian philosophy, which resulted in writing Visions de l'Inde, which describes his search for truth in Indian philosophy. And he also, apparently, he started writing about the lives of the saints of India, but unfortunately he didn't publish that. He passed away, sadly, before that. So he's a psychologist that's profoundly interested in superconsciousness, but very much influenced by that paradigm as he was introduced to it in the various countries specifically, and more specifically India that he went to. So he says that it's basically comprise of faculties that make man really man and not just a super animal. And he says that it awakens the higher consciousness, which is not to be confused with Koism or hypnotism. Now, super consciousness, let's talk about that very briefly. So, Lux, do you want to read out the quote I found from God Talks with Arjuna in chapter 1, verse 1? Now, this is one of the longest verses of God Talks with Arjuna, and if you ever start reading this book and you get to verse 1, you think, oh yeah, maybe I'll spend an hour or so on this if I really want to go deep, but it's like 30 pages, so you'll be spending multiple weeks on this. But get through it, because it's got a lot to offer, and you have to get into it. And you'll be pleased to hear the rest of the verses. None of them are as long as that, so get through that one. But yeah, so in that he's got, actually he's one of the only verses where he uses like imagery and figures. So he's got two figures. He's got one figure of a person meditating, and that meditating person is he's influenced principally by his soul. Yeah, King Soul, he calls it. And the other figure, he's got another meditating person, and that person is influenced principally by his ego, so he calls it King Ego. So, Lux, do you want to read out what superconsciousness means now in the context of these two meditating people, which represents us?
Definitely, I'd love to. Material consciousness diagram, I think there's a diagram that was supposed to be that, illustrates the changes in the bodily kingdom when the divine soul has been usurped by King Ego and his rebels. The ego is called the pseudo-soul, for it imitates the authority of King Soul and tries to dominate the entire bodily kingdom. But the usurper can never gain entry to the palatial inner chambers of superconsciousness, Christ consciousness, and cosmic consciousness. Ego can rule only the conscious and subconscious states of man. The inwardly turned consciousness in the medullary center is the soul's superconsciousness. Flowing outward into the subconscious and conscious states in the brain and spine, and becoming identified with the body instead of with the spirit, the consciousness as King Ego begins its desultory reign. Then comes the pure, intuitive, all-seeing, ever blissful consciousness of the soul, then Christ and cosmic consciousness.
So at this point, you would hope to be one with God, and the word anubhava is in this chapter, and that is actually having direct perception of God, and hence being in this superconscious state that this saint was in is actually you're witnessing him having direct perception of God. So that is the result of all his mastery over the pranayamas and everything. So that's superconsciousness. And but going back to what Jules Bois was saying, so he was saying that it's the exact opposite of the subconscious mind as conceived by Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, who's very famous and very popular in our circles. We like to talk about him a lot. But Mike, he's Austrian, and Mike is not here, so we can't do this topic justice. But essentially, he's talked Freud's theories were on the Oedipus complex and the dream analysis, and in that he had elaborated his theory of the unconscious, and went on to develop a model of the psychic structure comprising of ego and the superego and self-identification. So he's saying that this Jules Bois is taking what Freud is saying, but he's saying that the superconsciousness is the inverse of all of those things, and he's saying that it's don't even be confused by Coism. And Coism is another French psychologist, and he's got a very interesting method. I'll put a link to him and in description. And he does positive affirmations relating to any improvement that you want to make in your life. Where you heard all this stuff, right? But his famous affirmation is, every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. And I won't read what that is in French. But essentially, he's saying that he never cured anyone in his life, but he just shows people how they can cure themselves. And where have you heard that before in our own healing affirmations, right, Niriksha?
My mom, when I was a kid, my mom would, if we stole this exact quote, and I was like, who said it? Who said it? And I'd never got to know who said it. And then now, I always saw my mom. I thought this was my mom's quote, and I was like, oh, you stole my mom's quote. but I found out today it's the other way around. But I don't blame her, because I wanted to digress just for 2 seconds. The scientific healing affirmations really is so timeless, and it really connects to what we're talking about now, because in order to connect with the healing affirmations, you have to have some background in the material world. And I just love how there's this whole play between our little spiritual cave and the chaotic material world, and how it can be intertwined. The material world can become our cave, and sometimes the spiritual world can become chaotic. So we have to know when to switch between the two. And this whole section right here that we were talking about is proof for that. And it just really slapped me right now. So thank you again.
Welcome. I'll divert your thanks to Guruji, who's inspiring us to do this podcast and research this fascinating subject matter. It's fascinating, but at the same time, if you're an impatient reader and you want to finish the chapter, to do it justice, these are the kind of footnotes that take an hour reading and make it into a 3-hour reading, because if you're like me, you can't just leave it and take quotes face value. You've got to dig a bit deeper, and essentially that's why we're doing this podcast. So he was relating superconsciousness, and he's saying that it's been long recognized as in philosophy and in the oversoul, as spoken of by Emerson. And this is probably the 3rd time is it that Emerson is being referred to in the Autobiography of Yogi. So he's certainly a favorite, but he saying is only just being recognized scientifically, this presence of the super soul, and to connect to it. And the super soul, the over soul, as Emerson wrote in his essay, is now talked about in this next part of the footnote. And he essentially talking about the man being a facade, and there's an external visual image of what we see as a man that does all the human things like eating, etc. But that is a misrepresentation, because the soul is actually who he actually is, and it appears. It appears in various circumstances, or we can see it in various circumstances. So it's a very nice essay. I'll put a link to the whole of it. It's actually like very long. This is only an excerpt of it, but it's a very beautiful excerpt. The last line is, "We lie open on one side to the deeps of spiritual nature, to all the attributes of God." Really nice. Emerson is quite a profound thinker, isn't he? And Guruji has certainly made the most of it. So there's that. And that we can go on to the next section now, which is about levitation, essentially. So the next is he kind of they ask Upendra asks, have you? He says that he never sees that the saint ever leaves his home, and his tone was a trifle incredulous. He says, so there's a couple of things here. That seclusion. The importance of seclusion for us. We have Guruji telling us later in the autobiography in chapter 5. No, earlier actually in chapter 5, in one of the footnotes, he says solitude is necessary to become established in the self. Now, that's true for us. To become established, you have to have some, solitude, meditating, etc., alone. But when you've become established, after you've become established, such as Saint Bhaduri Mahasaya has, he is able to freely go out and not ever leave that state of anubhava, or that state of being one with God. So he could freely go out, as do people like Babaji, who go out, but very, very rarely. And he's saying here that the saint slightly relaxes his rule, during holy festivals such as the Kumbh Mela, I imagine, or Diwali, or Janmashtami, or any of the big festivals, I imagine, that he comes out for that. So Upendra can't. He's incredulous, he says. So the other thing is that people are shocked by the fact that people can live in seclusion, and perhaps it may even be a touch of criticism in Upendra's reaction, in the sense that people that live in seclusion, it's not essentially not cool to live in seclusion. Like, what's he doing in seclusion? That's a kind of a cultural criticism, isn't it, across the world, really. If you say, I want to go be alone, then it's it's not perceived in a positive light, is it? So this element, I think we need to challenge as we progress through this age, because we need to be alone often to become established in the self. So there's that element. But here there's another lovely line here, that when the saint does leave his home, he only ever goes to his sidewalk, and he says that beggars gather there because the saint is known for having a tender heart, which alludes to charity that he dishes out in the form of probably food. I doubt much money, but never know, because he could have some funds access to. His we'll find out later that his family was quite wealthy, that he left. But I imagine his charity would be things that his devotees had given him, like food or clothing and things like that. Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to say on the topic of the retreating, being on your own, it is I think you're quite right, Prank. The general feeling towards it is, from the wider public is kind of negative. You're a loner, a recluse, we have these words for it. But Guruji talks about it quite a bit. If you think about it, he often says that you have to retreat, to God. You have to go to the silence. And he sort of says it like, this isn't it's a nice to have. It's a no, do it. Like definitely do it, and do it as much as you can. Sort of instruction from Guruji. Even though we know from his life, he was so busy. He was going giving talks and being around people. So it's not to say that you shouldn't be mingling and mixing with people, but there is a lesson in there for us, isn't there? And I mean, my take on this, just as we're doing a podcast, we'll just throw it out there, is that you can't help others if you can't help yourself, and you can't help yourself if you can't then take the power from, let's say, build upon your own power through your connection with God, and you kind of do that through silence and meditation and retreating within oneself. So whenever I you were saying there, Priyank, that the beggars would kind of flock to him, possibly, yes, because of what they have to gain materially, but we can give so much to people that's immaterial, that's beyond our eyes and our understanding of in this paradigm that we live in, that we get from that silence and that retreat. So yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? It is such a what you see is what you believe for the most part for many people, and it's really what you can't see, which is the substance of this world.
What do you think, Lux?
Yeah, I love what you shared, Chris. Just to add to that, I also found that sometimes I would have an unhealthy relationship with retreating. It would become a sort of escape for me. I realized sometimes I'd be too in the spiritual, and so I'd be I don't know, using meditation to sort of just escape my problems versus retreating healthily and then going into groups and maintaining that equanimity with people, rather than sort of using it as an escape. So I think also there's a healthy balance. I probably wouldn't just live 20 years indoors, neither should I, because I have a role to play and I have things to do. So yeah, I think if that's sort of balance, that's also, we need to find that.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, because I think it's an important point. Guruji talked about retreating to the Himalayas, but that wasn't his role. That wasn't what he was here to do. So he wasn't allowed to do that in effect by God. He kept getting pulled back in, and had to live amongst, in the world, but not of it. So I think that it's not many people can afford, let's say, to simply retreat and be with God. In that sense, we all have that role. Yeah.
Also, we no, I lost my train of thought. It's essentially, I was going to say that the greatest gift we can give to humanity is our own self-realization. I think that's in some part of the teachings, but I can't remember where. Makes sense though. So there's some charity there, and then comes a very good question, which is Bhupendra asking, how does he remain in the air, defying gravity? So this is an intriguing question, especially if one such as myself that's interested in things like this, rockets and things, where we're trying to defy gravity. But it's an interesting question, because defying the law of gravitation, we don't actually know anything about gravity. We only know the effect of gravity, nothing deeper than that. So, Chris, you're going to say?
No, I just maybe have a comment on that define word, where it just goes against actually what naturally is occurring, and what we see in the levitation. I can't recall how deep it really goes into it, but maybe there's a way to work with nature that's so much more, makes so much more sense, and rather than trying to fire jet rockets or thrust that goes one way and propels you another way, seems so barbaric compared to what might be coming.
Yes. Nick?
I mean, but there's magnets, right? There's when magnets levitate, and that magnets are natural, and we're magnetic beings, so maybe it's something to do with how we magnetize our body. Also, I was going to say, yeah, magnetizing. Guruji talks about magnetizing your body. I mean, he also alluding to that we can also defy gravity by this chakra. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? I don't know. But I just wanted to just throw that out there. Like, it may look barbaric, but it can also be like magnets. So,
I think the ultimately in meditation, you're trying to take your gross energies and gross physicality into like the more subtler and subtler realms.
yeah.
And then you'll find that the more you do that, the more you'll forget your body, and hence you're more in touch with the subtler aspects of yourself, and therefore you're defying the grossness of gravity. The inverse of that, like succumbing to gravity completely, is essentially death, right? That's the ultimate succumb. The spirit is left, and your body is now going to completely be one with the dirt as the ultimate succumbing, isn't it, to gravity? So this is an interesting take on why we should be meditating, because we're trying to get to our ultimate nature, which defies science. It's beyond science, as physical science as we know it. Chris?
Not my ego trying to justify the science behind it.
Yeah. It's in the back of my mind, and I can't take it out as to where it might be, if it's an autobiography or not, or if it's even true. So, fact check me on this. But is it that Babaji doesn't even have a shadow? Is it that there's a saint within our lineage? There's something about that. I think it may be Babaji where, talking about casting, even walking, treading, you might not actually leave any imprint, but actually the shadow itself. So fact check me on that, because I'd be curious, but that maybe talks to what you were saying, Priyank, about the grossness of the nature of the body.
Yes, because the next line literally is confirming this, because it says the yogi's body loses its grossness after the use of certain pranayams, which is obviously what we are doing in our practices. We're using some of the pranayams that are being referred to here. So the next section is about saints who don't practice formal yoga have been known to levitate. So here it's saying that intense devotion is also something that you can do to levitate. And the previous sentence even goes to far to say that the people that can levitate hop about like a leaping frog, which is an equally insane to imagine. My dream that I had, I wasn't hopping about. It was like a very surreal lifting experience. But if I was hopping around, that's pretty crazy. Later in the chapter, he talks in the footnotes and other areas about the other saints, like Saint Teresa of Avila that did this, and Saint Joseph, etc. There's actually a whole Wikipedia page of this topic, which is the levitation of saints, which you can look at, and we'll discuss in more detail in a later episode. But it's quite cool to imagine that your devotion can take you to this metaphysical achievement, isn't it? Just pure devotion, and it must have been quite a thing to see these saints levitate without even trying, just because of the tears that were coming out of their eyes. Quite cool. So the next section is about them actually, how often he actually goes to see this saint, and really it's a topic of pilgrimages, how often Mukunda goes. And so Upendra wants to know more, essentially, and he's saying, do you actually go to these meetings? Is it trying to invite himself, isn't he? Let's be honest, as we would do, inviting yourself to a party, seeing as an invitation wasn't forthcoming. So he says, Mukunda says, I go often. And this comes back to the importance of pilgrimage, and I found quite a nice verse from God Talks with Arjuna, chapter 6, verse 11. Chris, do you want to read about that?
Sure. The yogi should meditate on a firm seat, one that is clean, untainted by dirt or unspiritual vibrations of others. The thought of life force emanating from an individual saturates the objects he uses and his dwelling. Sensitive persons can feel the inharmonious vibrations in a house where wickedness has reigned. A saint or other receptive person can feel the spiritual vibrations left by masters in the places where they meditated. A devotee meditating where a sage has meditated, even if the sage has long since passed away from this earth, by deep mental attunement can feel his vibrations. Devout men who go on a pilgrimage and meditate in a place hallowed by the ecstasy of a master receives definite spiritual benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the importance of pilgrimage. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's been instructed to us by Yogananda to, get a place to meditate and make that your spot, right? So you can anchor that energy in, and you can then, I think the theory is that you simply go into the meditations deeper and deeper more quickly the more you're in that place. So I suppose that's the one thing when I travel around a lot, and it's just finding that little groove is always just, you're kind of sort of wriggling yourself in just to try to get into that groove again. So I miss that when I do travel. So I feel that when I travel. So I do think that's very true. And I don't know, this is something that I guess you would be able to build, is your ability to perceive, but I haven't yet come across a spot quite like in Sintra in Portugal, and it's a beautiful spot, and I actually felt very much uplifted, and there was a lot of places where I thought, right, there's maybe been meditators here before or something. That's probably the only place when I was traveling around that I actually thought that and felt that, apart from the London Centre and things like that we're blessed to have as well. Yeah, very cool.
Nice. And obviously we have the London Centre, but also we can benefit from the places where Guruji meditated and lived, such as Lake Shrine, Lux, where you spent yesterday's Babaji commemoration service, and also Mother Centre. And you certainly get that feeling when you visit either of those lovely places. So he says next that Guruji says, I'm vastly entertained by the wit and his wisdom. And he's so much so that he has prolonged bouts of laughter. Lux, are you familiar with unstoppable prolonged bouts of laughter?
Oh my God. I have been notorious for being loud and laughing very loud and getting told off for that. So I think it's for me, it's a bubbling of joy inside that just comes through, and like childlike innocence. Because when you're children, you're just having fun, and you're laughing, and you're just being free and expressive. And I think sometimes we take things seriously on the spiritual path, and it's like remembering that it's just about having fun and enjoying life how we're supposed to as the soul, versus with the ego. And I try to always learn from like children and babies in that way.
So what you're saying is not good to grow out of childhood. You need to retain that childhood joy.
Yes, absolutely. I think retain the innocence, but don't be a child. Like obviously be an adult and like know how to do adult things, but internally you're still like childlike in that way. Yeah.
Nick?
I just wanted to add on to how Lux beautifully shared her point. I'm gonna give an example of me, because I still feel like I'm perpetually 5, and I this whole 2 months have been so intense. Where I graduated, I'm working now. I moved a couple of times, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna just feel like my big mommy's taking care of me, and I'm just gonna go along with the ride, and I'm gonna use my body as a vehicle to just do whatever needs to be done. But I'm gonna be inside as this child, just having fun. So I feel like the lessons and these stories have really helped me have that ease, because laughter is so essential, especially when life can be so chaotic and rough. So just allowing ourselves to just be happy no matter what's going on. It also shows our spiritual tenacity, where like you meditate in a crowded room, that's your laughter. You know, that's you're laughing on the inside while the whole world is just being chaotic. So yeah, I like that I get to branch off of what Lux beautifully said.
Have we actually got any recording where we can hear Guruji laughing? I'm trying to rack my memory brain. I can't think of one. I try not to listen to Guruji's voice too much. I don't want to ever get used to it. So then whenever I do hear it, then it's always just as powerful in terms of hard hitting as if I've heard it the first time. Every time
I listening to him every night as a kid.
So you're used to it. Do you remember any of his ones where he's actually laughing in the?
Yeah, I cried out of joy when I was a kid. I was like, "Mom, I love his laugh. It's so comforting."
Which one's that in? Sorry.
I think it's in Be a Smile Millionaire. He just starts laughing on the New Year's Day or something.
Cool. I'll have to look that up. So the next section is that he's laughing so much that the disciples are essentially giving him looks like daggers. Even though the saint himself didn't mind at all, or he wasn't displeased, but the disciples have a very strong expectation of what disciples should be like and how they should behave. And it's interesting because later on in this chapter, we know that Bhaduri Mahasaya, he says that he's essentially saying that saints are different, and God doesn't want us to pigeonhole what a saint should be, and this obviously equally applies to disciples. We shouldn't be, this isn't a mold of a devotee isn't just this and restricted to this. It can be anything. But these disciples have not obviously taken that message, because they're throwing him daggers. Heaven forbid. If only they knew who they were throwing daggers to, eh? But this eccentric devotees, I'm sure we have all experienced them, whether it's in the center whilst serving or otherwise whilst in our day-to-day lives. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about, but I think it's important to not to throw daggers, be they through our look or through our feeling of judgment. We just have to accept that people are different. And this is just such a beautiful example, because the Guruji is laughing here, very loudly, prolongedly, and people are like, and if someone did that maybe in front of you, then you might give them a curious look, but don't, essentially. It's a good message for us. Chris?
Yeah, I literally was saying yesterday to my dad that I was watching a YouTube video, and it was a podcast, and it was on quite a serious subject, and my dad watched the same thing, and I said, well, I think I'm going to have to go, watch some comedy or do something to laugh, to kind of to change the energy, because we need that, don't we? We need this lightness about us to be able to laugh. And what it makes me think is, Guruji talks about the setting in clay. You want to be supple in life, to be able to be molded to Guruji's hand, that he's lending to us in this path. So to me, it's this subtleness of the ability to be at ease, I suppose, and laugh is what comes to mind.
thus ends this section of the chapter that we're talking about. But I wanted to end with a couple of other saints that were not necessarily eccentric, but different. And India has produced lots of different saints through the ages, or incarnations of God, avatars, as we call them. So this is a bit of fun now. We've ended the chapter, and seeing as I've got two fun devotees in Yuksha and Lux, we're going to have a bit of fun before we leave today. So I'm going to relate. Oh, Chris, no. Chris, you're the audience. The audience are used to your, eccentricities. So they know your laugh. They know your smile. They know when a curveball is coming.
Yeah. Well, they see your tells.
They know your tells
by wincing.
Yeah, but they don't know Nirikshas and Luxes, and hopefully we'll find some of those out today. So, Niriksha, you may already know this story about Vedavyasa. So he is the author of a lot of our scriptures, but there's a nice story about him. So I'm going to say 3/4 of the story, and then you are then going to predict what happens in the next part of the story. Okay? There is a right answer, but the wrong answer may not necessarily be wrong, because it could be a nice iteration to the story. Hence, this might be a fun game. So we'll start with Niriksha, and then Lux, you don't get away so easily. You will be next. So first story is about Vedavyasa. So this story is from from God Talks with Arjuna, and the God Talks with Arjuna has got lots of little stories within it where Guruji describes various things that happened and how he relates it to what's happening on the battlefield, to the point that he's trying to make. So this is on in the description to chapter 3, verse 27, if anyone wants to follow it along. And don't look it up now, yeah? You can't look it up. Okay, so what happens is, there are gopis who we know, so this is in Vrindavan. So there are gopis where we know the gopis like to play with Krishna, they like to serve Krishna, they like to offer their devotions to Krishna. And so what happens is they gather a lot of milk and yogurt and cheese and things like that, which we know Krishna loves in his boyhood, in his youth. And so they gather it all and they collect it, and they've now got enough to go and give to Krishna so that he would be satisfied. But there's a torrential downpour as they're going back home to this village, and the river where they crossed is now gushing. Before it was a little stream there they crossed, now it's a gushing river. And this is not word for word. You can get the actual word for word story in the reference that I said. So that is the gist of it. So there's a gushing river, and they're like, oh no, how will we cross this river? We can't cross because there's no bridge, etc. What are we going to do? Krishna is going to go hungry. So they're, going a bit nervous, anxious, etc., having displeased Krishna. And Vyas is sitting on the riverbank, Vedavyas, and he's saying, you're all thinking about Krishna, but what about poor Vyas, who hasn't eaten anything in days, months, years? Heaven only knows how long. He is a yogi. And if you know a little bit about Vyas, this is more to it than his question is not just a mere obviously explainable question. There's more to it. There's more depth. So he said, what about poor Vyas? And their girl said, okay, we can give you something as you're hungry. We can give you some of this lovely yogurt and milk. So they give it to him, and Vyas starts joyfully eating it and keeps eating and keeps eating. And the gopis are saying, oh my gosh, he's eating all of it. And what are we going to do? We can't tell him to stop because we've offered it to him. So they say to him, excuse me, Vyas. Now, Niriksha, what happens next?
Okay.
Do you know this story?
No.
Okay. What happens next?
What I think happens next, there's two ways this can go. One way is where he keeps eating and he finishes all the yogurt, and then There's a Moses moment that happens in the river part when they go to Krishna and all their pots are filled with yogurt again magically. That's one part. And the second part could be they use the empty yogurt cans as flotation devices to float across the river, and then they empty it, and then then it becomes full again, and then they can feed Krishna. That's one of the two ways they
You're closer with your first one than your second. Chris, I'll allow you to come in now with a clue. I will say the moral of this story is thou art the doer and not I. What do you think, Chris, happened?
See, I think that's even harder now that you could. I'm just going to hard pass to Lux on this one.
Lux, do you know? I'm going to give you a fresh scenario, by the way, so you don't have to. You don't have to have a go.
I'm gonna pass.
Pass. Oh man, I thought you'd actually have a go, Chris and Lux. At least Nick had two good answers. So what happens is, so he eats it all, and the girl said, "Oh, this was supposed to be for Krishna. What have you done?" And Vyas said, "Oh, I didn't eat anything." And the girls are like, "Well, of course you did. Here it is, the empty bowls." And then Vyas says, and this is where Niriksha was right. Vyas says, if it's true that I didn't eat anything, let this river part. And then the rivers part, and the girls go across. Now then the girls go and find Krishna, who is sleeping, as he does. He's capable of feigning sleep for the purposes of this game and story and Leela. And Krishna says, what did he say? No, he doesn't say anything. Girls tentatively wake him up and say, sorry, we couldn't feed you. And he said, oh no, I'm full. And then the girls are like, how are you full? And then he said, that saint over there across the river, Vyas, fed me all the cheese and all the yogurt that I could eat. And then they understood the moral of the story is, so Vyas wasn't eating himself. He was in such an elevated state that he was devoting every single action that he's doing to God, and hence the food came across. And there's a couple of different beautiful morals in there. Firstly, the importance of devoting all your actions to God, and then secondly, to how to relinquish karma, because the girls may have thought, oh my God, they may have been worried for him because they've essentially, Vyas has caused his own downfall because he's eaten God's food, right? But he is beyond karma because he's devoting all his actions to God. So that activity is liberating as opposed to binding. So I thought that was pretty cool. I just happened to read it and I thought it might be nice to share. So I did. And listeners, if you're still with us, there's a second story that Lux will now get. And this story is about the sage Adi Shankaracharya. He's about 1,000 years ago. So he's a reorganizer of the Hindu faith, essentially. He reorganized all the texts, all the spiritual texts, and reintroduced dharma, as it were. There's a lot of confusion. But anyway, so there's Sankaracharya. He's a self-realized master, an avatar Lux, who you may have heard of. So Sankaracharya, so he is wandering around with his devotees, and he's he's advising devotees how to live their lives, what to eat, what not to eat, how to meditate, all that kind of stuff. So he advises, a vegetarian diet, very simple vegetarian diet. And some of his devotees are accustomed to non-vegetarian food. So they're a bit disgruntled that they have to eat vegetarian food. But they say nothing because their guru has told them this is the way. So they follow it. Now, Shankaracharya himself was obviously following the same diet that he himself preached, but he goes to someone's home and that family with devotion offer him something that's got non-vegetarian food in the dish, and he didn't want to be rude. He ate the non-vegetarian food, and his other followers that have built up this kind of subconscious feeling of I don't need to eat meat. They all start thinking, oh, well, of course Shankaracharya can do all this stuff. He can visit. He can go across India. He's got the energy to do all this because he eats meat now, and he's telling us not to eat meat. This is just hypocrisy. This is terrible. So then Shankaracharya realizes, obviously he's a realized master, he knows what the devotees are thinking, but he says nothing. So the next village they go to, he takes all the devotees and he crosses a blacksmith. Lux, what happens next?
See, you could ask me this one because I actually know.
Oh, nice. Don't say. Actually, I'll get you to finish the story, but lucky I didn't ask you, eh? Lux, what happens next with the blacksmith?
I feel like I need more context. Like, what is the blacksmith?
Blacksmith, he makes metal, he molds metal, he makes fire, uses fire to make and mold metal.
So he says hello.
Yeah.
He greets himself.
So remember, the crux of this was that his devotees are disgruntled because Shankaracharya just eaten meat, and he's told them that you can't eat meat. So comes to a blacksmith. What next? Whilst Lux is thinking, listeners, I want you also to pause and think about what could happen next, and put in your comments here what you thought would happen next. For Lux, sounds like I've bowled you over. You don't have a theory.
Does he offer him meat?
Oh my gosh, I want to jump in.
This is from Gotok Sudhajana. Yes, Niriksha, do you know what happens next?
I want to guess.
No, go for it.
It sounds very familiar. The story sounds very familiar. I'm just going to throw it out there. I think he asked the blacksmith to eat some metal and then makes his devotees to eat it.
Ah, very well done. Yes. So this is in chapter 1, verse 1, the long section. So what happens is he gets some hot nails from the furnace, molten metal, and eats it. And then he says,
like Doritos.
yeah. So he says, oh, so before doing that, he says to his devotees, oh, you want to eat what I eat. And the devotees must be thinking, oh, yes, finally, we're going to get some good stuff. And he then picks up this metal and consumes the hot metal. And then he says, if you can eat what I eat, then go ahead. And then hence they then realize their folly in experience in thinking that their master is an ordinary soul or not beyond the whims of desires of what to eat and what not to eat. But the moral of the story is that in this specific section that you can't pigeonhole, and this comes back to this chapter, you can't pigeonhole what a saint or a disciple or a devotee looks like. Because you don't have the full picture. So if you are a vegetarian or a vegan or etc., and you see your guru doing something that you may not agree with you're not in a position to dismiss that person because you don't have the full picture, right?
Guruji wore fur, like real fur coats.
Yeah, and we don't know, right? We don't know why he did it. We don't know what he was doing. We don't know the justification.
Yeah, he was riding alligators and ostriches. The guru was doing all sorts of things he would gotten the side eye for today.
Exactly right. Exactly right. But we don't have the picture. We only have the physical picture. We don't have the picture behind the picture, Chris. Yeah.
I'm glad you said it as well because I'm guilty of it. Actually, at the beginning of this podcast, not with any of us here, don't worry, but with the image that maybe you could show, Prank, you've got of the saint. Mohan Chaudhary, Upendra Mohan Chaudhary.
Yes.
Chaudhary. He's actually, if you look at it, sitting on what looks to be some kind of tiger skin or something like that, right? And I looked at it and thought, we're taught to sit on cotton, it's cotton, right? To nullify the effects of the
silk or wool, actually.
Is it wool? Sorry, thanks.
Silk or wool.
Silk or wool, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's, a great master, and he's sitting on what I would never want to sit on, is the skin of an animal. It kind of makes me think no way. And then I caught myself. I thought, well, that's, who am I to be saying this about?
Yeah.
This is a master, So it's interesting. It's kind of come full circle for me. Thanks, Prank, showing the picture on.
Yes, because there was a picture of Sri Yukteswar as well, and in the book, Yogananda describes Sri Yukteswar's meditation seat on fur, doesn't he? But yeah, we don't know. We know. Like, we can see one. That beautiful psychology thing where, like, you look at an image, what do you see, and then you think you see what you see, but then there's 99% of the rest of the image completely disproves what you think you see. So this is what.
Is it like a Rorschach test, or?
That's probably it, Nick. Chris?
Yeah, there's just yesterday again. I heard it a few times, but I've heard it throughout my life. It must be something I need to listen to. But a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. That's a saying that I think really sticks to mind, because it's not what you know. No, it's not what you know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just thinks so. Very
nice. Alrighty, I think enough fun and games and shenanigans. Luxa, hopefully, and Nurksha, you'll come back. I promise we won't make it as challenging next time. I know you two just woke up. You literally rolled out of bed and turned this Zoom call on.
I've been up since 6.
Meditations, ease.
Good stuff. Yeah. That's what we want to hear. All right. Well, thank you, Nurksha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun.
You guys crack me up. I love it.
And you are a very, very welcome addition to our podcast. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Chris, as well. See you next time. Jai Guru.
Yeah, Jai Guru.